you for that speech. I'd appreciate some order in the House. Thank you. Moving over to the opposition, the second opposition speaker this evening, we have Rabbi Charley Baginsky. Rabbi Charley Baginsky is the current CEO of Liberal Judaism UK. She's the co-lead for Progressive Judaism UK alongside Rabbi Josh Levy. Before joining Liberal Judaism, she was a rabbi for Kingston Liberal Synagogue for over 10 years and has spent time part as a rabbi for South Bucks Jewish community. You have the ears of the House.
In many ways, those who've gone before me have made my argument for me. For indeed, the tension that we experience arises not from religion itself, but from the historical interpretation of living in a patriarchal world. Religions, we know, do not emerge in a vacuum. They are embedded in and are reflections of societies that are androcentric, masculinist, and phallocentric, and thus fundamentally biased in favour of the male. Meaning, of course, that Judaism is no exception. It and other religions develop practices and traditions which interpenetrate and traverse the socio-cultural environs of patriarchy. Judaism, like every other religion, developed practices shaped by patriarchal norms, supporting ethical, legal, and socioeconomic frameworks that denigrate women. And yet, we must acknowledge that religion continues to have a compelling hold on our purposes and cannot simply, therefore, be left to the hands of patriarchal theology. Religions are living traditions. They evolve, they're dialogic, and open to reinterpretation. And like the previous speakers, I can speak only for my tradition. For Judaism in particular is polyphonic. It comprises of myth, of law, of poetry, and philosophy. This openness gives us hope that feminism and religion can coexist, reshaping tradition to reflect the values of equality and justice that are actually central to Jewish thought as well as to feminist theory. Religions, and perhaps none more so than Judaism, are living traditions. They're not static, nor are they reducible to a singular, immutable set of practices or beliefs, certainly not simply to the patriarchal Godhead. Judaism is polyphonic. It's dialogical, it evolves. It's precisely this fluidity and openness to reinterpretation that gives us hope for the future. For a future and almost a present, in which feminism and religion can coexist, in which we can reshape and reform our traditions to reflect the values of equality and justice, which are at the heart of both Jewish thought and our feminism. The challenge then is not religion itself, but the way in which it's been interpreted and practiced under the influence of patriarchal power. Society has not been spared this influence, so there's no reason to think that religion should have been either. Perhaps it might even be easier to redeem Judaism from these chains than society, for it has built within it an evolving and learning nature. And this is precisely where feminist theology and hermeneutics come into play. Jewish feminist scholars like Judith Plaskow and Rabbi Rachel Adler have shown us how our sacred texts and traditions can be read in ways that are more inclusive and empowering. They do not intend to discard the tradition or to reject its teachings, but rather to reimagine them. The Torah and the Talmud are not fixed in meaning. They are dynamic texts that have been interpreted in every generation over the centuries. Feminist interpretations of these texts offer a way to challenge the patriarchal readings that have dominated for so long. Let's take the revelation at Sinai, which traditionally has been read as a moment of male-centered exclusion, with the assumption that women were absent from the giving of the law. But feminist scholars have pointed out that this exclusion is not a reflection of God's will, but rather a distortion of the event itself. The actual story is not one of divine exclusion, but of human misinterpretation. Moses, the patriarch, is the one who fails to include women in the narrative. The moment of revelation at Sinai, when understood through a feminist lens, becomes an opportunity to challenge this exclusion and to reclaim women's rightful place in the story of our people. The ongoing work of feminist interpretation is therefore a critical tool for challenging that patriarchal obliteration of women or rendering them other that has pervaded my own tradition. It's not about rejecting those texts, but about engaging in them in the sort of deep critical work that actually,
I will ask you, I want to know the compatibility with feminism and religion, your religion. So I will ask you, what should a man that rapes an unmarried virgin should do to that woman? And you tell me the compatibility with feminism in that.
I mean, the question would be the same as what would be the interpretation in society. Jewish law in and of itself built in, way before my time, back in the Talmud, the fact that that wouldn't even enter into the practice of Jewish law, which is precisely why Judaism has built into it the sense of evolving law. That sense that Jewish feminists now are creating new stories, new midrashim, new stories that speak to our lived experience is as women, while still drawing on the language and symbols of our own tradition. They imagine those laws, push the boundaries of them, and think about what actually is considered permissible, and challenge even the gender-based language that's in our liturgies. So we don't talk within our own liturgies of God as man, not the God who permits a rapist to continue to practice and go unpunished, but rather to imagine God not just in masculine terms, but in terms that are more inclusive, more reflective of human experience. And this is not to distort Judaism. In fact, it is to live the actual tradition embedded in Judaism. For that is the tradition that Judaism itself has. Of course, this also means that feminist interpretations themselves are, in turn, constructions, just perhaps better ones. Jewish feminist theology can bring about a better iteration of Judaism, but the task cannot simply be intellectual. Change cannot merely be a means of rethinking theology. It must also address the material realities that women face in our communities, those that many of our speakers have addressed. It is not enough to challenge oppressive interpretations of religious texts if we are not also working to change the laws, the institutions, and the cultures that perpetuate gender inequality. Judith Plaskow, in her landmark work, The Coming of Lilith, teaches us that the work of feminist theology is not just about advocating for women. It's about imagining new possibilities for the world itself. It's about creating a world where women's lives, bodies, and their experiences are not only valued, but are central to the way that we understand and relate to each other. Feminist theology is not an abstract philosophical exercise. It's a practical, revolutionary vision for a better, more just world.